Welcome to Just Rambling, my new podcast based on the blog that I started. It'll be 20 years ago in June, where I share stuff off the top of my head, my rambling mind. Today's episode I'm basing on a publication I did in July 2006. So it really covers the adoption of Zack and Sophia from Russia. Surprisingly, there was a lot of controversy at the time, and we'll get into that. So let's go. So to set the stage for July 2006, both Deana and I were working at a Christian credit union. We had been together a few years. We were not out. I was divorced from my now ex-husband. We were living together under the premise that living in Southern California was too expensive for two single women to own a house. So we decided to combine our assets and buy a house together. But in reality, we were together. We were in a committed relationship. We were deeply in love. Deana had for most of her life wanted to adopt, and she had done some research. She had a friend who was working in ministry in Haiti at the time, and so she considered reaching out and adopting from the orphanage that her friend in ministry was working at. But there was some strange things were happening in Haiti, one of which was you had to send several $1,000s in cash with no receipt, and that was not something Deana was comfortable with. So she did some research, and she found, which I'll get into in a moment, what kids in Russia were going through at the time. So she decided, hey, I'm gonna check out this adoption process out of Russia. Now, again, I was very involved in that, but because we weren't together, we weren't a couple, we worked at a Christian organization which would not support our relationship. The process of this was that Deana was adopting these children, although I was very involved in the background. But while we were going through that, she was very vocal at our work, asking for prayers, asking for support. We did some really cool fundraising things, raffles, and we would bring in ice cream to sell it on Fridays. It was really exciting. But maybe not surprising for some of you, there were people in the credit union, I like to call them Bible thumpers, that started rumbling that it was very, very sinful that Deana would even consider to adopt children as a single parent, because every child deserves a father and a mother, and that she should be ashamed that she would even consider ruining the lives of children by being a single mother. Now, again, it was going to be me and Deana, but even if it weren't me and Deana, isn't that a bunch of BS? Like, how sinful for you to save a life of an orphan because you're a single person. So at the time that I wrote this blog post in July 2006, I was pretty pissed off because I'm all like, you bitches. And one of the people in particular was very holier than thou. And if you were to meet her in person, she was very soft-spoken. She fit the stereotype of what a good Christian woman should be. She seemed very submissive. She deferred to her husband, who also worked at the credit union, and, deferred to his direction. But she was a big spinner of this dynamic of how sinful and wrong it was for Deana to pursue adopting anybody because she was not married. So, yeah, I'm still getting worked up. It's been 20 years, but I'm just like, son of a bitch. Anyways, so at the time, I went to the Bible a bit about things. So I'm going to read some of those here too, because my worldview is very much about the goodness of Christ. But because of so many horrible things that have personally happened to me, I don't adhere to any organized religion, especially in America right now. But I am going to bring up these scriptures because the dynamic of that at the time, claiming that she was sinful for even considering adopting children as a single woman, I want to address. So in James 1, verses 26 and 27, it says, if anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. So here, Deana is trying to look after and help orphans. And yet this Christian bitch, excuse my language, is saying she's sinful for trying to help them out. Going on, I'm sorry for my language. Esther 2, verse 7 says, and Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Now, Mordecai, it didn't mention that he had a wife, and yet he's being honored here because he took care of his niece. 2 Timothy 1, verse 5 says, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. So Timothy's father was not part of his life, and yet Timothy was blessed by Lois and Eunice, and he was used mightily by God. So again, the Bible is suggesting there are other family structures apart from having a mother and father. And I take that attitude 20 years ago and even today, is there's this group of people that often say, I'm going to be political for a moment. Republicans are the family. We're for the family. And we don't want government dictating to you. But yet, I'm going to control your body and make decisions for you. You can't adopt unless your family structure is exactly how we say it should be. And yet, these same people, including my father, who is a devout Christian and Republican, is a divorced man. Come on. I'm divorced too. I honestly don't care if you're divorced. But you want to perpetrate these ideals that are a bunch of BS. Okay, back to the subject at hand. So one thing I want to emphasize, and which I did when I wrote this blog, nobody's suggesting that having a mother and father is not ideal. I think all of us who have fond memories of our parents, both our mother and father, would say both of them had important and different roles in our lives. But I would suggest that if you were someone with no parents in your life, to argue that it's better for that person to continue with no parents in their life forever, or to have one loving parent in their life, I think that argument is weak. So I'm not suggesting having a mother and father isn't ideal. But that doesn't mean that's the only option for people. And even at the time, I was divorced, and to the people at our work, I was a single mother. We didn't broadcast how Deana functioned as a parent to my kids as well. But they were thriving. And the thing is, especially since I was so entrenched in the Christian faith at that time, so many people in the church seemed to complain about all these fears and all these problems and all this negativity, and sin abounds. And they forget about Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even when I was young, before I accepted Christ, I felt like God had his hand on me and he was protecting me and that good things were happening to me. And it's funny that even in the darkest times of my life, I felt like I was abundantly blessed. So this attitude of like, oh, the world, the sky is falling, I've never understood. So let me explain some of why Deana and I, but really Deana was the lead on this, decided to adopt, but particularly why she decided to adopt from Russia. Now, again, this information is 20 years old. I'm giving you a snapshot of that time. I do believe that today's statistics will not be better. They may be worse, but honestly, I haven't looked at them. But this is a snapshot of when she was going through the process 20 years ago. I'm getting the information that was from a site called Ascent Russian Orphan Aid Foundation, and it was translated from the Ministry of Education of Russian Federation for the year 2000. At that time, over 700,000 orphans were in Russia. Most of the kids in the orphanages were kicked out or left the orphanages between the ages of 13 and 15. 700,000. Of those, 50% would fall into high-risk categories. 40% would become drug users. 40% of them had to commit crimes to survive. And roughly 10% of them would commit suicide every year. In 2002, there were only just shy of 5,000 adoptions from the United States. So there were 700,000 orphans in Russia, and about 5,000 were adopted in the United States. Since then, U.S. adoptions are not open to Russia anymore, and they haven't been for years. So already you can see that it was pretty bleak for these kids in the orphanages. Add a layer of complexity to this. The attitudes at the time in Russia were still very influenced by the decades, over 70 years of the Soviet Union. And a lot of this information I got at the time from an article called Street Children in the Former Soviet Union. So it went on to say abuse was endemic to the system. In a 1998 report by the Human Rights Watch, it said that Russian orphanages had many of the problems, such as they said that children with no parents are treated more harshly than those with parents, and the parents keep in touch with them. Punishment by the director and staff may involve physical assault, verbal abuse, public humiliation, for example, forcing children to strip in front of peers, isolation in unheated rooms in the winter, or standing naked in front of a open window in winter. Runaways from the orphanages are often regarded as abnormal, and they're sent to psychiatric hospitals. I will say, Zack was in a separate orphanage from his sister Sophia because he was 5, she was 3 at the time. She was in what was called a baby house, but he was with a bunch of teenagers. He was the youngest child in the orphanage where he was. And once we adopted him, he said that it was often the case for no reason. It was just random. They were brought in to take showers. They had to stand in a bath and they hosed them down with a hose that was next to the spout. The water was cold. They sprayed them off. And as they would get out of the tub, the women there would smack them with the hose on their bare skin. Not because they were being bad, just, I don't know, because they hated them. I don't know. That's abuse. This report went on to say, at the heart of this systematic abuse and neglect suffered by orphans in Russia lies a deep tradition of ignorance and fear. Time and again, people told us, repeating like a mantra, how the Soviet ideology promoted the quest for the perfect Soviet man. As a doctor explained, all children and everyone had to meet the standard, and if they did not meet the standard, they had to be kept apart and hidden from the rest. Children with disability were not seen in public, and the myth associated with them flourished. Further, if children were taken away from their parents for neglect or given up by their parents, or if they were, especially if their parents were still alive, for those two reasons, taken away for neglect or given up by their parents because they couldn't afford them. The attitude then says, because the attitude for disabled children was, give them up. Doctors would say, give up that child, put them in an orphanage, try again. You don't want a disabled one. You want to keep them out of the public eye. So if your child was taken away from you from neglect, or you gave them up because of any reason, but let's say you couldn't afford them, the attitude was, they must have something wrong with them because you're giving them up. So they're disabled, so they need to be out of the way, and they're not worthy. A Russian journalist quoted in the report said, I'm sorry to say you will hear terrible things about orphanages, and they are probably true. It is really a large-scale problem. The staff sees them as animals. We saw it. Even the nannies who love them treat them mostly really like pets. They do not really see that there's a person inside who could think or learn something. Recently, there was an article in a Russian paper about a baby house where kids with defects live. Baby houses are for younger, 3 and younger. A few days later, the readers wrote a reply that these kids should be killed. We don't want to see them, they said. People are not ready to share any money with those who are disabled. They believe they are not really human beings. It's terrible. So this is what was going on, and part of the research that Deana had done at the time. Did I really just almost refer to myself? Okay. So she was reading this really sad situation in Russia and thought, okay, I'm going to adopt from Russia. And at the time she said, I really want to adopt siblings, 2 boys, two brothers. And she continued researching. So I will continue with my post that I did 20 years ago. So at the time of the report, in Russia alone, there were at least 1 million street children. 10% of those street children were orphans. Although the report conceded there might be as many as 3 million children on the streets at the time. 6 in 10 will probably end up in prison because they have no recourse. When you are an orphan in Russia, your birth certificate is updated and it says you're an orphan. With some of the dynamics I shared a moment ago, people automatically think there's something defective about you. So nobody wants to hire you. They don't want you to be part of their businesses. They don't want to help you. They think you're scum. So the only recourse these kids have with no support in their life, 15 years on the street, is to commit crimes to survive. So 6 in 10 will end up in prison because that's the only way they can survive. In Russia, 75% of children who leave state orphanages become prostitutes, drug dealers, or involved in crime. More to that point. In Russia, over 1 million minors were arrested in 2001. 1/3 of them had never gone to school. Now, I will say that Sophia in the baby house didn't receive any education. Now, she was only 3 when we adopted her, so maybe that's not a bad thing. Zach was 5, and he did know how to write in the Russian language, and he did know basic math. He seemed to have received some sort of education. How robust it was, I'm not sure. I'm going through my post here. Okay, another statistic here. According to the Moscow Times, the 15,000 Russian teenagers who leave orphanages each year, 40% become homeless, 30% become criminals, and 10% commit suicide. We keep hearing that suicide. And this was the one that broke my heart. And this did impact Zack and Sophia. It is estimated that 90% of children who have been abandoned have families. At the time, there was so much poverty. There was a lot of alcoholism. Children were being neglected for all of those reasons. Russia was trying to protect the children, but again, you take away the kids for neglect and then they're branded as orphans. It's a horrible cycle and these kids are trapped in it. Um, so it's pretty bleak, and we agreed when initially Deana did the research and she brought me into this knowledge. We thought this freaking sucks, and I don't want to diminish what children in the United States have to deal with. There are far too many kids in foster care being neglected, having to do things on the street that are illegal and exploitative. I'm not minimizing any of that, but I've been to Russia. It's been 20 years, but I would say that it was worse. All to say, we both agreed that the situation in Russia was pretty bleak and we wanted to be part of the solution. And I'm not going to get into the play-by-play, but it's not cheap to adopt, especially internationally. And it's not like getting a puppy. Now, puppies are like, I have 5 dogs. Puppies that's an investment for life. There's a lot involved. You got to take them to the vet. You got to do, but being a parent is hard. It's not just a fun, happy-go-lucky do things. It's a big commitment. And I have great respect for Deana's desire and moving forward to adopt these children. So we go to Russia and we meet Zack. We meet Sophia, siblings, brother and sister, and yet she's being told, or the rumor mills at the credit union is saying that Deana's this horrible, sinful Christian for considering adopting these children. And I would venture to say, all right, Bible thumper, you would rather have Zack and Soph probably end up on the street as early as 13, probably by 15. Their parents not having any contact with them since they were 1 and 2. No resources to fend for themselves other than prostitution, drug dealership. Probably couldn't find a job because their birth certificate would say that they're an orphan. There would be a lot of other kids on the street to fight against. You would rather them have to deal with that than to be adopted by a single Christian woman who had a great job, owned a home, was a Christian, wanted to love on them and to give them the life that they would never have. And she was committed, as was I, but again, she was outwardly committed to changing their lives. She didn't do it to fill a void in her own life, but she wanted to truly make a difference in someone else's life. So at the time, and I'll say it again, if you still feel that what Deana wanted and did do is wrong, then why the didn't you adopt yourself? So now it's 20 years later. I'm going to add it. We since have come out, and probably this woman would have even more to say about 2 women raising these 2 children that were adopted from Russia, like the scandal, like the horror. Zack is now 23. He had a birthday a few days ago. He is close to getting his college degree. He's hugely smart. He's an extremely hard worker. He has been his entire life. He's kind of a neat freak. He is very loving. He's good looking. He's hungry to succeed. He's been with his girlfriend for several years. He lives on his own. He pays his bills. He's purchased cars. He cares about his family. He's very engaged with us. He and I are the sensitive ones most of the time. And that's my dog in the background. Sophia is 21. She holds 2.5 jobs, and she side hustles all the time, grooming or cleaning dogs. Today, she had to go to work on a Sunday for one of her jobs early, and she came home with donuts and kolaches for us. She calls every once in a while and says, hey, I'm going to 7-Eleven. Do you want anything? And recently, she got me something, and then Hody, my dog, ate it. Anyways, she's a hard worker. She has no desire to go to college, but she really does. She really wants to start her own business, and I believe she'll get there. She is very loving. She and Zack have thrived. They are so enmeshed. They're so woven into our hearts. At times, I forget that they were adopted. I feel like Sophia is often my mini me. We're so in love with these kids, and their lives are so amazing. And even when they, at times, we would talk about their. Zach has more memory than Sophia. Sophia doesn't have that much. She'll remember pictures and stuff, but Zach has a hard time thinking because he remembers how hard it was. He has memories. He remembers his biological parents. He remembers the neglect. He remembers the abuse that he received in the orphanage. He remembers how bleak it was. And he compares and often articulates how his life is so rich in comparison. I'm not saying that to say how great Deana is or that I am, although Deana is great. It is where it's to emphasize that Deana saw a need and she said, I'm going to fill it out. And even now, if you're friends with her on Facebook, she's often sharing how local children are looking to be adopted. She'll say, adopt. These kids need you. So anybody that wants to still push that this wasn't right, that they haven't been blessed, that you don't trust your God enough to make this adoption work out for the good, I question you more than Deana. And again, I just want to turn the tables a little bit. Our lives, Deana and I, our lives are so rich. I would say that our other kids have a better understanding of life and empathy and differences and forging what family is. That family can be very different with each group, and that no one should complain about forging a family unit, even if that family unit is different than what you're used to. So I'm abundantly glad that we adopted Zack and Soph, which was, I believe, 18 years ago, just late March. I am so proud to be their Maddie. That's what they call me. Deana's so proud to be their mom. I'm so glad that they have had an opportunity to be blessed. I'm so glad that they've become these humans that really give back to their communities. And that Bible thumper and those that made that big deal at the credit union 20 years ago, you can suck it. And I pray for you because you're kind of pathetic. But anyways, that's my rambling for this time. Again, if you want to read the original post, it is called Bible Thumpers Beware, posted July 29, 2006. I'll put a link in the comments, but yeah. If you want to see more, my blog is justrambling.blog, and full notes will be there for this as well. Take it easy. Bye.